Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. It's questions day, Kieran, and I have to say our questions, as ever, are interesting, but I would make a note, people, and you're listening to this, perhaps a pen and paper, because all of the questions have clauses, and one or two of them have sub-clauses. I've tried to trim them down a little bit, but they're such interesting questions. They are, well, one's a proper essay, but we'll get to that. But we have a couple of news stories, Kieran, before we get into those questions. And on Friday we had, it wasn't a budget as such, it wasn't a mini budget as such, because the Chancellor wasn't obliged to show his workings, so to speak. But it's been controversial. I think many people would say it was a budget for the wealthy, Kieran, and as Premier League footballers are very much amongst the wealthy, I'm guessing that they're quite happy with some of the things that have been suggested by our Chancellor.
Yeah, yes. And as you know, I'm party political neutral, but it was some interesting stuff. Cristiano Ronaldo, for example, if we take the top 10 earning footballers, Cristiano Ronaldo, as a result of the changes in Friday's budget or non-budget, whatever you want to call it, he will now pay, in respect of his Manchester United salary, £1.3 million less in tax than he did before. So that's a lot of money. And so, well, yeah, my background's in economics. So, well, you could have done that, or alternatively, you could have given 13,000 people an extra £100. So those are the choices that the Chancellor had, and he decided, no, I'm going to give this. Now, is that going to be economically beneficial for the country? Well, this is the way that tax breaks work. If you give a poor person extra money, they're going to spend it, right? Because they don't have much choice. So they're going to go out and, lots of people this winter, we know that the choices of, are, I appreciate it's a bit of a cliche, the choice is, do I heat or do I eat? A bit of extra money, you can do a little bit of both. So if you give a poor person an extra £100, they will spend that extra £100. If you give a person who is on a high salary an extra £100, they'll save it. So therefore it doesn't boost the economy. So this proposal, and we're sort of, I'm trying to couch this in footballing terms. It just seems very strange because there's the economy needs boosting, and the best way to boost it is from the bottom up, because people at the bottom spend money. So you've met my son now. People, I'm not giving a sob theory here. My son's 29 years old. He's got Asperger's syndrome. He's unemployed. He's also got 9 grade A stars at GCSE. So he's not got learning difficulties, but he's got broader issues to deal with.
He's one of the brightest people I've ever spoken to, Kieran, I have to say.
Well, he's a lot brighter than I am. And he's very naive, so he's very trusting, and he goes along and he gets short-term jobs and he doesn't get paid. So he's just done a job working as a litter picker. Okay, 9 grade A's at GCSE, but he's Asperger's, so therefore people can exploit him. So he got a job as a litter picker for a festival, and at the end of it, this was in Grimsby, the promoter comes up to him and says, "Oh, we didn't sell as many tickets as I anticipated. Sorry, lads, I can't pay you." Yeah. So then he has to get home from Grimsby to Manchester with no money. Yeah. So if you give him an extra £100, he will feed himself. I'm his dad. I'll make sure that his rent gets paid and so on. But and by the way, if there's anybody in Manchester that wants to employ somebody who is bright but doesn't necessarily express himself in a conventional way, just drop me a line, Kieran at priceoffootball.com, or drop me a line on Twitter. I've got somebody who's, you've met him, you say he's a bright lad. He's very, very committed to helping the homeless, and he designed this database for all of the charities in Manchester that do all different things in respect to the homeless, put it all together, linked it all together, and gave it to somebody else who said, "Thanks very much. I was going to pay you, but I'm not going to." So, it's his sob stories and hard luck stories are about. But I'm not here to do that. It just seems a very, very strange budget, because Premier League footballers, and I've always defended the right of a Premier League footballer to earn as much money as they can. It's a market after all. Cristiano Ronaldo doesn't need an extra £1.3 million. It's as simple as that. Whereas people at the bottom, you think about and again, Manchester United, and I will give them lots of praise here. They've committed themselves to the real living wage in Manchester. I think it's a fantastic thing for the club to do. If you can give the people that are working on a match-by-match basis an extra £100 each, they go out and spend it, and it boosts the economy. So I don't know what Kwasi Kwarteng's like doing, and I'm not a political person, but I just scratch my head as somebody with a background in finance and economics and so on.
Well, the theory is, Kieran, I believe that that extra £1.3 million that Cristiano Ronaldo now has will eventually trickle down to the likes of your son. It will take some time for that to happen, but that's the thing. And the thing is, we're not blaming Cristiano Ronaldo here. I'm like you. It's not his problem, and he won't probably notice that he's £1.3 million. But just limiting ourselves to the world of football, there will be many professional footballers in League One, League Two, and the National League who are struggling equally as well. Who will have decisions to make about heating and eating. This is maybe not so much there, but they're not earning fortunes. And we've already seen that several clubs have applied for, as we discussed last week, early kickoffs because they don't think they can afford energy bills. So, it's a slightly odd one. But like you say, Kieran, we're not political. I think you've made your point very well. But you mentioned Manchester United, and it's been an interesting record-breaking week for them, Kieran, at both ends of the scale.
Yes, in a variety of ways. First of all, their 2022 accounts came out, 1,676 pages.
Wow!
Yeah,
how happy were you? How far in have you got?
Oh, I've done the full. I was wee Willy Winky on Friday night. Yeah, I was. You can just imagine the Baroness going, okay. Yeah, she was mainlining Prosecco by about 11 o'clock. I'll go, oh, you've never seen this. So, yes, you're absolutely right. There were some records. Manchester United have the highest wage bill in the history of the Premier League. Their average wages are now £178,000 a week. And that is a lot of money. And remember that the Premier League footballers' wage packets are highly incentivised. Manchester United came sixth in the Premier League and didn't win any cups. So can you imagine what it would have been had they actually won something? So it is a lot of money. I anticipate that they might be leapfrogged by Liverpool and or Manchester City, both of whom had pretty successful seasons. But they also made their highest ever losses. Yeah, they lost £150 million before tax. That's the third highest in the history of the Premier League.
Sorry, Kieran, Man United lost £150 million.
This is Manchester United.
Manchester United lost.
This is the biggest brand in. Well, I think it's probably the biggest brand in world football. I appreciate fans of Real Madrid, Barcelona might disagree. But they lost 150 million quid. And this is in a non-COVID year. Now, there were some excuses, should we say. They borrowed a lot of money. The pound's tanked against the dollar and is continuing to tank against the dollar. So that's not helping. Finley's had enough now. So.
Well, he's a Man United fan, isn't
he? So. Yes. And, we talk about football clubs sometimes having tin ears. If you've just lost £150 million, does it look good? Does it pass the smell test if you then decide to pay the highest ever dividends in the history of football? Yeah. So Glazonomics comes to the fore, and Manchester United paid £34 million in dividends. A sizable proportion of that went to the Glazer family. Yes, some went to the other shareholders. So it looks bad. Their debts are now, their football net debts, as we refer to it, is now the second highest in the history of Manchester United. It's doubled since Sir Alex Ferguson retired. As a case study, I'm teaching a football finance module coming up fairly soon, and Manchester United just give me everything that I need. I don't have to work hard myself. They are a perfect case study in a very unusual way in which to run a football club, which is arguably the biggest in the planet.
It's interesting, Kieran, because we've been talking a lot recently about Real Madrid and Barcelona making huge losses but carrying on in their merry way, signing players. And yet here we are under our noses. Manchester United, as you say, as big, if not bigger than those clubs, making these huge losses without barely a ripple on the back pages of the newspapers.
Yes, and the reason why they're doing it, they're doing it on credit. They borrowed from the banks, and the other thing that they're doing is that they can legitimately say, look at all the money that we've spent over the course of this summer. It's all on credit. So that they owe over £180 million in unpaid transfer fees to other clubs, and that's before they went on the summer spending spree. So it's amazing stuff. And we talk about football living in a bubble, and this is an example, oblivious to. We've just come out of COVID, so therefore you think you'd rein things in a bit. The Glazers have come in for some criticism, a lot of which is justified with regards to their involvement in Project Big Picture, to try to take over the domestic game, the Super League, and so on. You would think, right, okay, we don't want to make ourselves look too bad here, too greedy. No, we'll pay record dividends. So it's just a very strange way to run a club which is close to the hearts of so many people.
So there is the option not to pay dividends. So this is not an automatic thing that this amount of money has been made. We get this amount of dividend. They could say we're not paying dividends this year, could they, or lower dividends?
The dividends are normally agreed by shareholders. So the Glazers have 96% of the votes. So therefore, they could quite happily say to the directors of the club, given the circumstances, given the economic crisis that the world has been through as a result of COVID, we think that we can go a year without a dividend. And I think that would send a different signal out to the fan base. But you only have to go onto social media and type in hashtag Glazers out, and something comes up which will occupy you for a few hours of fairly angry Manchester United fans. Interest on loans has to be paid. Dividends are optional. Dividends are normally paid out of profits. If you've lost £150 million, paying yourself a record level of dividends just doesn't look too clever.
A long way south of Man United, both financially and in league position, we come to Southend United. And there's some interesting developments there this week, sort of industrial action almost as well, Kieran, isn't there?
Yes. Southend United have had a fairly checkered history in the last few years. There's been quite a few winding up orders from HMRC, and the owner, Ron Martin, he sort of, I wouldn't say he's playing the game, but he likes a bit of brinkmanship with HMRC. And normally at the last minute, just when they're about to go and formally go through a winding up procedure, he pops along with a cheque, and any outstanding taxes are paid. But there's other people that have been unpaid as well, and that's the employees. And this is something, I do not believe, somebody that comes from an insolvency background, somebody that's had to deal with people who've been through some fairly distressing activities of company owners. I think it's fairly reprehensible that people are going unpaid if they've got contracted employment. Now, The club has said there's a short-term cash flow problem. Some staff have agreed to a wages deferral, but reading the Southend Echo, and there's a really good local journalist there, I think called Chris Phillips. He's been trying to keep an eye on this. Some people are saying, well, it's been 6 months. Every month it's 2 or 3 days late. It's a week late. Well, if you've got direct debits, if you've got standing orders, if you've got financial commitments yourself, that's simply not good enough. And I think what has happened, and I did see the story, and I've tried to find it again today, but I couldn't. I think that some people only got 65% of their wages last month, something like that. So what some people have said, right, we're only going to do 65% of our job, and therefore, the social media account, we're only going to report on the match 65% of through the 90 minutes and things like this. And I think it is I'm a great believer in sort of the Gandhi approach to protest, non-violent, direct action, and so credit to them. Many of them will be Southend United fans. Many of them will love the club, but you cannot work for an organisation on a series of broken promises and late wage payments. So. I hope that things get sorted. I know Ron Martin has plans for Southend United. He wants to move the club to an out of town stadium and develop where they do play it at Roots Hall. You and I, we're both away fans. I've been to Roots Hall, to watch my lot. Typical. I went from Manchester Tuesday night to Southend. We lost. Drove all the way home. Got home at 3:30 in the morning. But I've been there, and it was a cracking atmosphere. It's a proper lower league ground, and it will be sad, but I'm not opposed to change if the facilities improve for the fans. But things are not moving as they should.
I very well remember an evening game. So we were sitting near the beach about 2:00 in the afternoon, preparing ourselves for the evening game. We were joined by a couple of Southend fans, and one of them said, it's called Roots Hall, should be called Fuck All. That's the sort of fan I like. Like you said, that's a very good way of demonstrating, isn't it? So if our listeners wonder why we stop halfway through the pod, you'll realise that producer guy's been up to his usual tricks. Our final news story as well has been an interesting statement come out of Preston North End.
Yes, we spoke when Trevor Hemmings, the owner, and I know you're a fan of horse racing. He was a big benefactor to the horse racing industry. Well, he passed away, but his family loved Preston North End. His son Craig has said, my dad brought me along. I've been watching him for 50 years. I am a Preston North End fan, but there's. So social media has some pluses. It also has some pretty significant minuses. The cloak of anonymity that it brings allows people to bitch and snipe and so on. So I think he just had enough. So he put out a very long statement on the club website, and he pointed out that his dad was very generous. Since his dad passed away, they've effectively set a budget where they anticipate a shortfall, i.e. a loss, which they're prepared to subsidise, of £12 million a year. That's £1 million a month. That's 250 grand a week. And yet, for some fans, it's get somebody rich in. Well, do you know, they nearly did get somebody rich in. That guy was called Chris Kirchner. And remember, in, I think it was March, Chris Kirchner was going to buy Preston North End Football Club. And I know this guy isn't the favourite with some football fans. Peter Ridsdale effectively said, no, you fail the smell test. There was something not quite right in Ridsdale's assessment of Chris Kirchner. And frankly, that club dodged a bullet. We saw the aggravation that Chris Kirchner caused, and he with Derby County, and he raised the hopes of the fans, and he strung everybody along, and then he disappeared, and it turns out that he's not paying the wages of his own staff for his Sync.io organisation, and Google his name and see what he's up to. Preston North End is a club with one of the smaller budgets in the Championship. Last season, for every £100 of income, it paid £196 in wages.
Wow.
And that shortfall was made up by the Hemmings family. So you might not like the fact that they are not billionaires putting billions into your club, but take them away and then see what you've got. So I'm not defending rich people or poor people. I try to be neutral on these. The Hemmings family have been generous benefactors to Preston North End, and sometimes you're far better sticking with what you've got. And if somebody was giving me a £250,000 a week subsidy, I probably wouldn't be giving them too much stick.
Just for our listeners, Kieran, who probably associate the name Peter Ridsdale more with Leeds United than Preston, can you just remind us what his role is at Preston North End?
Yeah. He is now a director. He was at Leeds United. He was associated with the financial struggles at Leeds United. Some Leeds United fans said he went on an overspending spree. You've only got to Google the words Peter Ridsdale and Seth Johnson to get a very interesting tale. Peter Ridsdale says that never took place. There seems to be sort of there's always two sides to every story. He then went to work at Cardiff. He was then banned from being a director of any company in the UK. So he was still working within football without being a director. But when his period of ban ended, I believe he is now back as a director of Preston North End. The Hemmings family like him. He certainly has got experience. He is also controversial.
Yeah. And once you've Googled Peter Ridsdale, Seth Johnson, Google Peter Ridsdale and goldfish.
Yes.
If there are two sides to every story, unfortunately, we'll never get the goldfish's version. But nevertheless. So, on to questions, Kieran. And as I said, you will have to pay attention to a lot of them, but it's worth it because they are very interesting questions. The first one is topical and pertinent, and it comes from Guy Widdowson. And Guy says, this is a question from someone who's been living down under in Auckland for the last 3 years and has been missing football so much, he's moving the family back to Kent so he can start going to live games again. And in brackets, which is only a slightly exaggerated tale, which may mean that he's coming home on his own and the family is staying there. Who knows? But Guy says, with the depressing and catastrophic war going on in Ukraine, I was wondering what the football teams are doing there, which I know is nothing compared to the actual war and suffering that is happening. But are the clubs like Dynamo and Shakhtar still paying the players and staff wages? Or in such extreme circumstances, does everything essentially stop until they're able to play again, perhaps in a neutral country? I think some football has restarted in the west of Ukraine, away from the front, and certainly Shakhtar are playing Champions League games in Poland, aren't they, Kieran? So there is it's not a return to normality, but there is some football happening in Ukraine at least.
Yes, I mean football was suspended following Putin's war, but football is a force for good. This show perhaps it does get us too disillusioned at times because there are too many bad news stories on it. But football is a force for good. It's a force for togetherness. And you're absolutely right. The domestic season has started in Ukraine. It started on the 23rd of August. Clubs have played 4 matches. But because of the indiscriminate and sometimes quite malevolent targeting of public sites by Putin's mob, the matches are taking place in empty stadiums. There are air raid sirens which are at the ground. So if there's a sign of potential missiles coming across, then the matches would be suspended. There has been talk about the domestic games taking place in neutral venues, as Guy suggested, in I think Turkey and Poland, but the Turkish players want to play. The the Ukrainian players, they want to play in Ukraine. They are a very proud nation. Some of them have gone off to fight to defend their nation, but the players who are remaining, they want to play, and the clubs which are playing in Europe have been given permission by UEFA to play their matches on neutral territories. So it's some one of the great things that when war ends is a great sign of normality is football matches taking place, and with I say we've already established we ain't political. I'm Team Ukraine. I don't think that's a political thing. We want them to be able to defend their sovereign statehood, and in due course kick out Putin and be able to return to matches. But in terms of paying the players, there's been nothing reported as such. I don't think that's ever been a sort of priority. I think the players are, as much as anything else, playing for pride. I know that some of the overseas players, I think what UEFA said, effectively your contracts are suspended. You can go and find employment elsewhere. And I know that Brighton's new manager, I think he was involved with the Ukrainian team as well, and that's why he was effectively out of a job when he came to us last week.
I know producer Guy strives unsuccessfully at times, Kieran, for us to maintain political balance. But I don't think even he would worry about the fact that we declare ourselves openly to be on the side of Ukraine. This circumstance. Is there any financial help from UEFA to those clubs that can't play football?
There will be what's referred to as solidarity payments, but they are not significant. Solidarity payments go to some of the clubs which have played in Europe over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. But the majority of the clubs in Ukraine will not be giving any financial assistance. And I know we've sort of discussed this matter before. What's happened to the £2.5 billion that came from the sale of Chelsea Football Club? If that can go to help. And there are more important issues than football, but if some of that can go to help grassroots football, kids playing football in Ukraine, that would be, I think, a fantastic representation that football can be a force for good. And although there are very wealthy people around, helping out those in a significantly less fortunate circumstances to ourselves will be beneficial.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Neil Holroyd. Neil says, are Premier League clubs under strict instructions from TV companies, specifically overseas, that kick-off times for games are adhered to so that adverts can be run during half-time or post-match? I've noticed that Premier League games seem to kick off on the dot of the scheduled times, whereas EFL might be 1, 2 or 3 minutes after 3 o'clock on a Saturday.
Yeah, my understanding is that when it comes to the Premier League, because there are adverts taking place up to kickoff, and we are talking very close to kickoff. The Premier League is very, very keen for the fact that the Premier League is being broadcast in 198 countries. I think it's something like North Korea, Cuba, Afghanistan, and one other. I think there's only about 4 countries in the world. So the Premier League is aware of the expectations and demands of its commercial partners, but I think normally the referees wear headsets. They tend to get a nod from the producers. Certainly when Sky and BT and Amazon they have live matches on, that tends to come from the domestic broadcast partner, and they say, literally, you've got 10 seconds to go, and then you kick off at 3 o'clock on the button. When it comes to halftime and full time, here football takes priority because there might have been a few VAR decisions. We are now in a football environment where it is not unusual to have 5, 6, or 7 minutes of injury time, because it's not injury time; it's normally VAR time. So therefore, there has to be greater flexibility from an advertisement point of view at half-time and full-time. But running up to the kickoff itself, the Premier League does its utmost to kick off at 3 o'clock on the button, or the time of individual matches, in order to meet the requirements, or to assist its broadcast partners as much as it can.
Now, Kieran, you and some of our listeners may be aware of the concept of burying bad news, whereby politicians wait until there's a major event going on and then mention something that perhaps they should have done. And it may seem like that's what I'm doing by halfway through the questions, throwing in something of a slightly negative nature. But the reason I'm doing it is because I forgot to do so at the start of the show, Kieran. There's nothing sinister or manipulative in my motives. I'm just looking at my notes, and even though I've got about 25 asterisks around it, I forgot to mention it. And it's simply that in one of the answers to a question last week, we gave an interpretation of an answer that was, shall we say, disagreed with by most people who knew the real answer.
Yes.
And that was, we had a question about why Boreham Wood in the FA Cup game against Everton, why the players were wearing kit supplied by one manufacturer and the coaches were all wearing kit supplied by New Balance. And it turns out there's quite a simple reason for that, Kieran, isn't there?
Yes, the National League have an agreement with New Balance. I think they originally had one with, I think it was a sports company called Yotta or something like that.
Yotta, yeah.
And whereby New Balance is the official, I wouldn't say leisure wear, but it's the official kit supplier to the whole of the National League in respect of what the managers and coaches wear. And it's quite a lucrative deal. I therefore sort of, I did find out, and thank you for those people. And there are many of them. There are many of them,
yes,
I can assure you.
Many of them.
Who have been in contact. So yeah, that's great. Yeah, we get things wrong. We quite happily hold our hands up. And it then turns out that the National League takes this extremely seriously. So I managed to get hold of the National League fines book, and fines books are works of art. You know, what you might consider to be petty, for some things, is taken extremely seriously by football authorities. And if you're in a football match and it's being part of the BT Sport deal, and you don't wear your official New Balance tracksuit top, you're wearing somebody else's, it's a £4,000 fine, which for a National League club is big potatoes. So so apologies for getting it wrong. And once again, I'll wear my hair shirt, my New Balance hair shirt, of course. And thanks for keeping us on our toes.
Yes, so New Balance supply the kit to anyone who's in the technical area of, so it's about 8. But that list of fines, because you shared a couple with me, it's like captain's armband. I mean, it's like not wearing a captain's armband, 200 quid, 100 quid North and South National League. And then suddenly it just ramps it up to 4,000 quid if you don't wear New Balance on a live TV show. But fair enough, if New Balance have paid that money to supply the kit, they want money for their thing. But I hope that's cleared that up. And perhaps you could stop tweeting now, everybody. I really love this next question, Kieran, from Johnny Turpin, because it's a very intelligent question, but he's only asked a very intelligent question so that in the middle of it, like cracking open a walnut, he can have a go at his own club, essentially. Johnny Turpin has decided that if he was just to have a go at his own club, we probably wouldn't read it out. But he's worked out successfully that if he wraps it round like a Russian doll, if he wraps it around an intelligent question, here we go. Johnny Turpin says, do you think it's possible for all clubs in the Premier League to be run as break-even or potentially profitable and still be able to compete, I beg your pardon? Clubs like Man United and Liverpool are run with the intention of making money, but still attain success in terms of trophies and European places. On the other hand, you have a club like mine, Everton, who got the big money every club dreams of and pissed it up against the wall. Or Chelsea and Man City, who are seemingly happy to spend anything to win and take a loss. Is it possible for the Liverpool Man United model to work across all 20 clubs, even if the money is not for shareholders but just goes back into it? Made me laugh so much when I read that question. Just a club like mine who pissed it. I just like the fact he says every club dreams of and pissed it up against the wall. Sorry, Johnny. We are taking the question seriously. We just recognise a fellow upset football fan. But it's an interesting question about the various financial models in the Premier League. You know, can a club compete at the highest level and still break even or make money?
Yes, I think there's a number of issues here. I think you just first of all define what you mean by compete. So is it avoid relegation? Then I think it could be done. All 20 clubs could be run in such a way that you could break even or make a small profit. But what we have at present is we have a handful of clubs who have a substantial financial advantage over the others in terms of, we spoke earlier on about Manchester United losing £150 million in 2022. There are other clubs that have lost substantial sums, including Everton. We'll be coming back to Everton a little bit later, in fact, for another question. But you can have a break-even model. And here I give you Burnley Football Club, who, when they were in the Premier League, broke even every year. There were critics of the club, both from within the fan base, saying, "Well, you're not ambitious enough." Remember, Burnley got into the Europa League. That's a hell of an achievement, if you ask me. But and they now have been relegated. So it can be done. If you want to have a more competitive Premier League, then what you need to do is to address the distribution model, as suggested by the fan-led review led by Tracy Crouch, which we'll be covering in more depth on Wednesday, because talking about a bad day or good day to bury bad news, I think the fan-led review has been buried. Right. So we'll be coming back to that. So the Liverpool and Manchester United model is successful because those clubs have what I'd refer to as legacy benefits. They have historically been successful, and on the back of that, they have generated global fan bases who are willing to engage with the club through buying merchandise, through paying for membership schemes, and so on, which does give the club a financial benefit over the others. And if you were to say, well, you're not allowed to lose money, and remember, we do have a quasi break-even model under the existing financial fair play rules or profitability and sustainability rules, then it would make the existing gaps in football even wider. And is that what we want? And this is the ultimate, the sort of the philosophical debate that we have. Do we want a sustainable financial Premier League, or do we want a competitive Premier League? And when I talk to people, quite senior in terms of, I do lots of budgets and I do lots of spreadsheets for people, and I keep asking the question, what is it that you want? And nobody will give an answer. Because the trouble with, if somebody has to give me an answer, it means that some people are going to lose out, and nobody in positions of influence or power says, well, actually, I want a model which is going to create a closed shop or reinforce the closed shop, or I'm going to do a model which is going to upset some of the American owners. Or so there was a really good article in The Guardian a few days ago, which I think sort of summed this up, that the Premier League seems to want the showbiz element of American sport, which certainly has some merits, without the egalitarianism in terms of the distribution of money. Remember, there's been 12 winners of the Super Bowl in the last 15 years. That's not been the case in the Premier League, has it?
Yeah. This is an interesting one, Kieran, from Lawrence Wisdom. It raises a couple of issues that have never occurred to me, I have to say. Lawrence Wisdom says, with the UK and Ireland involved in the bid to host Euro 2028, I wanted to understand the commercial incentive for clubs to offer their stadium up to hosting a game. Would the club receive a flat fee from UEFA for use of the ground, or is the fee structured to reflect ticket sales, catering, sponsorship exposure, etc.? Or would hosting be more of a reputational play for clubs hoping to leverage the increased interest of the Euros as a negotiating tool for their existing or potential sponsorship agreements? Now, one of the reasons I find this very interesting, Kieran, is that you may remember just minutes after the Lionesses won the Euros earlier this year, Ian Wright very angrily referred to, and he said, I won't name them, but they know who they are, several, he said, high-profile clubs who had refused to allow their grounds to be used in the Euros for whatever reason. So it never occurred to me that it wasn't UEFA or FIFA choosing the grounds that would host the games.
Yeah, I think the point that Ian Wright was referring to, perhaps a little bit obliquely, was that some clubs had agreed to rent out their grounds to host concerts, and the money they made was greater than was being allocated from UEFA for the Women's Euros final that took place this summer. So it was a financial decision. But it did mean that the opportunity to play in some of the perhaps more prestigious stadiums around the country was not seized upon. Now, if you are hosting a World Cup or if you are hosting a men's European final, because they generate more money, the promotional fees that UEFA and FIFA are prepared to pay tend to be higher, and that would be impacting things. Although there was a report, I think it might have been in the Times or the Mail a few days ago, that if England are successful in bidding to host Euro 2028 with the home nations and with the Republic of Ireland, then I think Anfield and Stamford Bridge will both be excluded because the grounds, the pitches themselves are too small. They don't actually conform to, and that's why you won't see a UEFA, say a Europa Cup final at Anfield, whereas it could take place at some of the other grounds around the country. So there's always a lot of politics involved. As far as the clubs were concerned, you would get normally an agreed fee from UEFA up front, because with no disrespect to these countries involved, let's say that you are hosting the men's or the women's European finals, and you've got Moldova versus Albania.
Yeah,
and you might not sell many tickets, but you've still got your costs of hosting are fixed. So there tends to be a hosting fee which is agreed well in advance. So I think some clubs will be willing to put themselves forward and perhaps ask for a relatively low fee for hosting individual matches, and they get that from the FA because they want to put themselves in the shop window. They want people to be aware. So I think the MK Don Stadium, for example, is one of the potential grounds where matches might take place in for Euro 2028 and so on. It's a bit like Eurovision. There is an element of prestige involved. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be profitable. The FA paid UEFA a lot of money to host both the final and the semi-finals of the men's 2020 tournament, which remember was taking place across a variety of cities or a variety of countries in Europe. And sometimes you do that as loss leaders because you want to say, well, look at what a great show that Wembley could put on. We don't want to go and revisit why things went wrong there. But also, if your country gets to the final, it is an uplifting experience for all concerned.
So is there a bidding process, Kieran? Say, for example, both Southampton and Brighton wanted to host a group that was based on the South Coast. Would they put in separate bids, or would UEFA plus the FA say, no, we think Southampton's a slightly bigger stadium or whatever, so that would be the best one?
It would be a beauty parade of which financial considerations would be an element, but not the only element in making that final decision.
Do you know what? Selhurst Park played host to a couple of games in the 1948 Olympics. And it really annoys me. There should be a plaque.
Yes.
Really. But there isn't. There's a lot of things there should be a plaque for at Selhurst Park. Phil Smith has a question. Phil Smith says, can a club nominate the legal entity they wish to submit for FFP monitoring? For example, the Stoke City structure, as I understand it, says Phil, is Stoke Holdings with two daughter companies, Stoke City Football Club and Stoke Property, who hold the training ground and stadium. However, the entity with the EFL share is Stoke City Football Club. So I was quite surprised they managed to do this. Can the club say, we actually want to nominate Stoke Holdings as the entity to be measured for FFP instead of Stoke City Football Club?
I think here the EFL is probably one step ahead of some of the clubs. Certainly I understand exactly where Phil Smith is coming from, and for people not familiar with a confirmation statement, every company on an annual basis effectively has to send to Companies House a list of shareholders, if there's been any significant changes in shareholders during the year and so on. So the EFL does that because early in June each year, there'll be 2 clubs coming up from the National League, replacing 2 clubs who are dropping out of the EFL, and there will be 3 clubs swapping places with the Premier League. So there is a change of shareholders. I don't think that clubs can nominate this because otherwise, if I was Stoke City, I would say, well, our ultimate holding company is the Bet365 group, and they make an awful lot of money. They could buy Neymar, Mbappe, Messi, Ronaldo. They could buy the whole shebang and still make huge profits for an FFP perspective. So there are limits, and what the EFL do is they say, we want to take a look at those companies which generate the money and which have the major property assets as well. So the EFL are on message here in terms of stopping companies manipulating. And I'm not saying that Stoke City would do this, manipulating which set of accounts are used to assess for FFP purposes.
We have another FFP question, Kieran. Again, it illustrates how eager some of our listeners are to find loopholes. It comes from Anthony Hirstein. And Anthony Hirstein says, as a listener since day one, how nice to hear from you, Anthony. I'm aware that there are certain costs that are exempt from FFP regulations, such as infrastructure, women's team costs, and youth team costs. But my question is, how exactly are youth costs defined, and is there potential to exploit this?
Yes. I mean, Anthony is probably sent his question in after episode 1, and he's been waiting for it to be answered. So he'll probably stop listening now. But thank you very much, Anthony, for the continued support. In respect of this, and I think this is certainly an area where there is the potential for manipulation. You're absolutely right. Youth team costs will be the salaries paid to youth and academy players. They will be the academy coaches who have got dedicated roles. Now, sometimes you will find somebody is deemed to be 50, this coach spends half his time with the academy, half the time with the first team. Under those circumstances, all of that coach's employment costs would be allocated to the first team. This is to stop clubs from deliberately trying to shift costs away from that part of the club which is assessed for financial fair play purposes into what we might refer to as the virtue spending. Which is, as Anthony said, infrastructure, community, women's team, academy scheme, and so on. But there is still some opportunity because you might have some people nominated for X who end up doing Y. And I was contacted by somebody who is involved in the academy setup of an EFL club, to say that we nominally say have a budget of £60,000 for all of these following areas, and that's what's submitted to the EFL. We only get 10 grand of that, and the rest of it goes to the first team. So so I can't clearly, I won't name the club or the circumstances. Things are taking place which shouldn't, and it's the nature of the beast.
Producer guy is at home thanking you very much for not naming the club. Our next 2 questions, Kieran, are questions you love because it gives you the chance to delve deep into the accounts of an individual club. And the first one comes from Jamie McAllister. Jamie says, I'm a Coventry City fan, but after moving to Hereford recently, I've had one eye on Hereford FC. Jamie, I almost envy you. I would never move out of London, but Hereford would be one of the places I did go to. It's my late father-in-law, God rest his soul, was a minister there for 7 years, Methodist minister. I love Hereford; it's a brilliant town. And also, if there was such a thing as a second team, and there isn't because you're not allowed to have one, mine would be Hereford. And if Hereford had relegated Brighton all those years back, my God, they'd be my second team. But Jamie says, I'm aware of the history and the troubles of Hereford United, but I was wondering how Hereford FC are looking in terms of their accounts.
Right. What I would say, Jamie, there is some good news. If we take a look at the most recent accounts in respect of Hereford FC, and I was at that match on the 3rd of May, 1997, which was the slowest 90 minutes of my life.
My birthday.
Oh, was it?
Wow. I didn't get the present I wanted.
No, you didn't. And it was relief rather than joy. But that relief was tempered because there were Hereford United fans, should I say, who were in greatly distressed.
Yeah, of course.
It's. And we wouldn't have had a club had we lost, and they lost Hereford United in subsequent years. So there's no joy in their struggles since then. But in their most recent accounts, which is June 2021, the good news is that they had £300,000 in the bank. They do appear to have a lot of investors, a lot of shareholders who are willing to continue to fund the club. And they take the approach of some of the clubs which I really like, such as Lincoln City. In Lincoln are really good at what I'd refer to and I think our both are in this category as the little and often approach. So last week, for example, the investors or the shareholders of Hereford put another £5,000. Not as a loan, because as we've established, loans have to be repaid, loans of interest. They put another £5,000 into the club in the form of shares to provide some working capital, to provide some liquidity to allow the club to pay the bills. So the fact that they had to do that is indicative that things aren't brilliant, but the fact that they've got people who are willing to do that does I think give a degree of solace, Jamie. So good luck to everybody at Hereford FC.
I don't think, Kieran, that there are many football fans of our generation whose eyes don't mist over slightly at the mention of Hereford United, just for that wonderful game against Newcastle United when thousands of kids all wearing Parkers.
Yes.
even the ones that kids dropping out of trees next to the ground, which had no grass on it when they beat Newcastle United in the first field. Just remarkable. As a mate of mine says from me, remarkable scenes. And Ben Evans is a Sutton United fan. And now don't get jealous here, Kieran, but Ben's been looking at Company's House. I just point out other people can look at Company's House, Kieran. Other people can be impressed by Tracy Crouch. Just wind your neck in. But Ben Evans has been looking at Company's House, and he says that on March the 17th, please God, I hope it's this year, details were released about a change of ownership of the club backdating to November 2021. Yes, it must be. That's great. Is there anything to be suspicious of or worried about for Sutton fans about this change of ownership? Now, I presume if the details were released on Company's House, they weren't made public elsewhere, Kieran. Would that be a correct assumption?
There has been some mention of the ownership interest. This is from an organisation called M Buzzsport LLC, which is Dubai based.
Oh,
and they have had a historic link to Southend United. They have been, I think there's some sort of sports marketing company as much as anything else, where their aim is to try to increase the sort of the digital footprint of the club, to get new sponsors and so on. Again, looking at the most recent documentations which have been submitted to Company's House, somebody put in £226,000 in July 2022. Now, again, that can be both for good and bad reasons. It could be that they needed some money and they managed to find somebody, or the fact that somebody is trying to accelerate the club along. So there's no evidence that the change of ownership is a bad thing. At present, it's best to say it's a thing. I know, and this became perhaps a story we'll cover on Wednesday or Thursday, that some owners or new owners, and this in respect of Crusaders in Northern Ireland, are not necessarily good people that, or certainly not my naughty step when it comes to changes of involvement with clubs.
I'm quite looking forward to recording Thursday's pod. You've mentioned a couple of really interesting sounding stories. Our last two questions, Kieran, are kind of similar in a way, but one from a positive approach and one from a negative approach. But the first one is Nathan Hopwood. And Nathan says, as someone that enjoys football video games, one of the appeals is creating a new club with an insane budget, buying up key players and working your way quickly from League Two to the Premier League. And in a couple of months' time, people listening may realise that this is a scenario that we will come to discuss further. If I were to be, that's a spoiler alert for Christmas presents next year. If I were to be a multi-billionaire with more interest in football than sense, what would be the major barriers to me forming my own club and bankrolling them up the football pyramid? How long would this take? And are there any rules or regulations that might pose as major barriers to stop me? So, I mean, it's a billionaire takes over essentially a Sunday league team. How far can he get on his billions, Kieran, and how quickly will it take?
Well, I mean, the good news, Nathan, is that as far as non-league football is concerned, there are zero barriers. You can go through things as quickly as you want. And I think if we give the example of Salford City. The owners there, that club has lost money on a regular basis, but the class of '92 and Peter Lim have been pretty generous benefactors, and it causes resentment amongst other clubs, fans. Just as if somebody gets some money and starts splashing the cash, it does cause some bad feeling, and that's probably sort of what we're seeing at Wrexham Football Club. Following the takeover there, but there is no financial restrictions now. When you get to when you get to leagues 2 and 1, I'm sure Nathan is familiar with the phrase salary cap management protocol. A good opening line if you're on a dinner date. Have you heard about this one, baby? Salary cap management protocol.
Only for you, Kieran. Only
for me. This is why I go home alone.
You go home to the Baroness, Kieran. That's why you go home alone. That's
right, yes.
The important thing to keep hold of. Thank you.
Yes. And the salary cap management protocol is what we sometimes refer to as a soft wage cap. So in League 2, you're only allowed to spend 50% of your revenue, and in League 1, it's 60%. But then we come to something called Football Fortune, and Football Fortune says, for every £1 you put into the club as an owner in the form of shares and not loans, you can spend £1 on wages. So if you are a billionaire, if you want to go and put an extra £10 million into the club, you can spend an extra £10 million in wages. Now, in League 2 and League 1, that will give you rocket boosters. That will allow you to whiz through those two divisions. So I think you can. If you are a billionaire, Nathan, I think we can get you to the Championship pretty quickly. Myself and Kevin are more than happy to act as advisors, of course. Well, when it gets to the Championship, bit more of a challenge because we do have profitability and sustainability rules kicking in, which limits your losses to £39 million over a 3-year period. We've probably seen that, you can certainly pick this up from the nature of the questions that we get asked on a regular basis. There are elements of those rules which are softer than others, and the EFL has a tough job. It's constantly playing whack-a-mole. It's recently, for example, abolished the use of transferring stadiums to yourself to boost profits and so on. But there's always an accountant or a lawyer or somebody who's thought outside the box of coming around the rules. So I think we can certainly get you to the Championship with relative ease. Then it becomes more challenging, but not impossible.
If there are any multi-billionaires listening, and if Nathan Hopwood is in fact asking for himself as a multi-billionaire, I would suggest you take Kieran's advice before you take mine. But sorry, this concept of football fortune, Kieran, is that actually something that exists? What is football fortune?
Yeah. Football fortune. If you go to the EFL handbook, football fortune is defined as money generated from player sales, money generated from cup runs, and equity investment by owners. And 100% of that can go effectively against your wage budget. So have a good cup run, sell a player, or just have a rich person come in, and that does allow you to effectively boost your wage budget.
Well, our final question comes from Chris Payne, and it's a question I like. I like the sound of Chris. Chris is working on metaphorical levels. Chris says, I have a question which is prompted from an article about how long it would take for the Earth to show no signs that humans ever existed if humanity ended. Brackets, answer, not as long as you'd think, exclamation mark. That's a cheery thought for the first thing on Monday morning. If all owners in the Premier League stopped putting in finances tomorrow, what order would the clubs go bust in? I presume Chelsea first, followed by Man City, but who would last the longest?
Right. So I can now go into Alan Fluff Freeman mode. I've worked out the figures for...
Look him up, everybody. Look him up.
Yes. We are so down with the kids.
He's actually one of the 70s BBC DJs you can look up without any worry. So, yeah.
I thought, well, I'll look at this since the inception of the Premier League, but the Premier League has evolved. So if we take a look at the accounts of Premier League clubs over the last 5 years, who has made the biggest losses? And then we'll take a look at who could survive the longest. In fifth place, Brighton and Hove Albion, the fifth biggest losses. Palace was sixth, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Fourth, Fulham.
What?
And you think about, Fulham. Third, Aston Villa.
Oh.
Second, Chelsea.
Oh.
But the biggest loss makers over the course of the last 5 years, and Everton Football Club, which ties in with one of our earlier callers, earlier question answer. Who was talking about pissing money against the wall. So Everton, they would go the quickest.
Wow.
In terms of the longest survivors, and some of these clubs have been relegated, fifth was Huddersfield. Fourth would be Newcastle. And we've had this discussion before that Mike Ashley, not a popular man in the Northeast as far as Newcastle fans are concerned, but he did run a sustainable football club. So Newcastle would survive the fourth longest. Third would be Burnley. Second would be Liverpool. And the club that would last the longest, the club which is the most sustainable, is Spurs.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, why? Why is that?
Spurs have been spending at some years £39 on wages for every £100 of income. They run a really tight ship, and what they've done with the move to the new stadium, it's geared to making money 365 days a year. I was talking to some people last week who I met down the line and said, "What are you doing?" So, we're doing the Spurs walk, across the pitch, using that sort of that strange walkway, which would put the screaming EBGBs into me. But it's a way of generating as much money from as many people as often as you can. The fact that they've got the concourses, which are big enough, which encourage people to stay longer. They've got these drinks providers where you can pull a pint 10 seconds quicker than from a normal. And everything is geared towards maximising cash return.
Now, Kieran, before we finish, would you just repeat that Spurs wages to income figure and compare it to the Preston one you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, Spurs are in their best years, and it has gone up a wee bit since then. £39 in wages for every £100 of income, and Preston North End, who are a club who people would normally think they don't live beyond their means. £196 in wages for the most recent season, for which we've got results, for every £100 of income. You cannot run a business and break even in such an environment.
And that's why the Championship is a basket case.
Yes.
I'm glad you mentioned Spurs Walk, Kieran, because I've been worrying how to crowbar this in, because we normally end with a little message about our Patreon page, but just for once I'm going to end with a little message about some money that you can perhaps give me, because if you've been following our social media, you'll know that Kieran's one of the many people who kindly donated to the Palace Foundation. I did a 26-mile walk yesterday, along with 150 other Palace fans, to raise money for the Crystal Palace Foundation to help make life easier for some of the young people in South London. And I walked with my very good friends from 5 Year Plan, the Palace fans in, and I'm not feeling too bad, apart from the fact that my little toe of my right foot looks like someone has taken a hammer to a plum. But if any of you would like, particularly you exiled Palace fans who listen to this, if you'd like to make a small donation, £1, £5, £10 would be lovely. Then just giving FYP Marathon March 2022 is the place to go, and that would make up for the agony. I just can't tell you, people, if you're thinking about putting a £1 or a £5 in, my little toe, oh my God. Kieran was one of many fans of other clubs who donated, including many Brighton fans, which again, we talked earlier, Kieran, about the power of football, and it's so encouraging that fans of other clubs and that Brighton fans can put their rivalry aside to raise money for our foundation, as Palace fans would do for you. So thank you to everyone who's already donated money for the FYP on the Marathon March. And thank you to everyone who's donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod, then please go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. And if you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, and before this very exciting pod that's coming up on Thursday, I will hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo, what the Palace Foundation do is absolutely fantastic. And, for any Brighton fans, as we've always said, you can't have a rivalry without rivals. So if you want to support the show, Patreon's one method. Another method is to get onto your app, which you're using to download the podcast. And you can give us a review. You can give us 5 stars. It helps us in the charts. It does make a difference in terms of algorithms, in terms of people who we're trying to get on as guests, and they sometimes read the reviews and they go, well, we're not quite sure what's going on. Why have they said? Why has somebody suggested that the show would be better presented by Kwasi Kwarteng and Pastor Mick? For those of you that not know Pastor Mick is a former heroin addict who found his salvation in religion, and he formed the Church on the Street in Burnley. And I've seen some of the work of Pastor Mick, and he goes and he deals with the people who I personally think would be better off with £100 each.
Yeah. The world needs more people like the second person in your suggestions than maybe the first, Kieran. Also, you've made me feel really bad now about suggesting that I was upset that Hereford didn't beat Brighton. Your lovely words about you can't have a rivalry without rivals. I just feel really bad now, Kieran. I wanted Brighton to be relegated out of the league. I'm quite a good actor, aren't I, really, sometimes?
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.